All right, so hi everyone, I'm Peter Wang. I'm CEO and co-founder at Anaconda. I'm flexing on you all with my blue sky handle down there. This actually is the first time that I've posted my blue sky handle in a slide deck. But today I'm going to be talking about, well, I'm not going to show any code, but I want to motivate sort of a discussion now. I think the last time I saw some of you was, it seems like decades ago, before the whole AI thing kind of showed up on everyone's radar at the level it is now, of course. And so I think it's now a good time to really look at what does this mean for us, especially those of us who are interested in decentralized computing, those of us who are interested in open source. What lessons can we learn from kind of the open source movement, and how do we carry some of that spirit forward? And so it's kind of it's a talk that covers many different things, but hopefully gets people thinking about some of the stuff in a more cohesive way. So first, just a little bit of open source. I'm sure most people here are familiar with open source, but I find that many practitioners actually don't necessarily take a step back and think about the human ecology or some of the other kind of aspects besides just write some code, push to GitHub, things like that. So we're going to start with industrial capitalism, okay? And the way we tend to think about economics in the world today basically is rooted in industrial era machines and labor and owners of machines and what we call capital equipment, all of that stuff. And so it's a very simple construct. There's a lot on it. You can get entire PhDs on just aspects of this, but at a high level, I mean, you sort of get 80% of what you need to know by just thinking about this, that the way the world thinks about economics is you have people who have muscles that can push on things and pull on things. They got brains that can think thoughts. And there's machines which we pour oil into or put electricity into, and those machines then scale up either the labor or the thought. And so capitalism as a concept is the idea that the person who owns the machine gets to decide what happens to the excess, the surplus, the profits that come out of the other end of it. So that's like basically explaining it like you're a room full of 5-year-olds, but it's actually kind of basically the structure. And socialism saying, no, the workers, right, the laborers own the means. Well, they have a right to dictate what happens to the means of production and then to the surplus. So it's very simple. So the interesting thing is that software wasn't something that was considered or treated in this regime of like a machine because it's code, right? It's actually, fun fact, the origins of software as intellectual property actually started with the roles that go into player pianos. Because player pianos were these things that could reproduce labor and thought together, and you just had a sheet of paper with some holes punched in it, and that was a distillation of the thought. So anyway, the entire world of software, intellectual property, software licensing, all these things, that has an origin in the 1960s and 70s. And in fact, the first software copyrights were law students from Columbia who wanted to test to see if the US Copyright Office would allow them to copyright software at all. So it was like test code, testing in production, or something like that. But in any case, the Copyright Act of 1976, which then became effective in 1978, which is the same age, I was born in 1978, not January 1, but basically the idea of software as intellectual property that you could hand off to capitalists and whatnot, that's as old as I am. And I'm pretty young, I think, But so this is a very interesting thing, that the regime that runs the world, at least the whole software world, tens of billions of dollars of all this stuff, is a set of legal foundations that's only as old as I am. And so the other thing to know, for those of you who are employed at all by anyone to write code, by convention, basically everywhere on Earth, if you are employed by someone to write code, unless you're a contractor, actually especially if you're a contractor, but if you're a W-2 employee, as we call them in the US, if you're a full-time employee, as part of the conditions of employment, you have to hand over all of the intellectual property that comes from your paid work on company equipment. I hand over all of my personal stuff to the company I founded. So the actual, the entity Anaconda owns all of my intellectual property, which technically includes the slide deck, I think. So in any case, the interesting thing, the reason I bring this up though, is because there is an exception. There's a giant asterisk on this, which is open source. Right? Open source is still somewhat governed by the Copyright Act, but we put license.txt in all of these open source repos that say, you know what? this is copyrighted, but if you comply with the terms of this license, you can do whatever you want with this, right? Some of those licenses, in the old days, for those who remember, there was shareware, right? There was like, use it, if you like it, pay me. There was postcardware. Use it, if you like it, send me a postcard of where you're from. There's like 2 clause, 3 clause MIT BSD, there's GPL, there's all sorts. There's Apache, there's Mozilla, there's everything in between. And actually, fun fact, postcardware licenses are not actually open source licenses. They're not OSI compliant because they require the user to do something, right? They compel the user to actually do something to be compliant. So in any case, the point is that open source software is an interesting thing, but if we actually back up one step to this level of like here, why is software property, intellectual property? Why is software treated the same as like, some kind of like steam-powered machine? Because if you really think about software, and this is my assertion, is that software isn't, what we see in the open source community at least, it becomes really stark and clear to us, that software isn't just code. Software is actually relationship between the person or the people who make the code and the person or people who use the code. There's a relationship between these. And so there's a feedback from users going back into the dev community. The dev community tries to grow organically like an amoeba, pulling in people who submit a pull request to fix some documentation to say, hey, could you fix this bug too, right? There's all of these different kinds of dynamics. So if you look at this if you actually have an in the open evolution of a software dev community, what you actually begin to realize is that holy crap, software isn't an artifact. Just like when you scoop water out of a river, like it's not about the scoop of water that's in the cup. It's actually the river itself that's the interesting thing. And so open source software is able to adapt more rapidly to both the actual terrain of needs of users, and it's able to, because of the internet, it's able to go and source interesting input and contributors from all over the world. And so this idea that software is actually a relationship then builds to the next concept, which is that software then isn't actually property. These artifacts that we produce, it's like an apple coming out of a tree. The apple, if you see the apple as being a connected thing, it's a part of the overall tree life cycle, then you realize that the apple itself isn't the property, the tree isn't the property, the tree is an expression of the soil and the entire sort of verdant valley or the garden, the fertile ground that it's based on. The whole thing is a connected ecology. So if you take away the shackles, if you take away, shackles may be a harsh term, but if you take away that lens, the 40-year-old lens, 40-something-year-old like me, if you take that lens away and you stop looking at software as being this piece of intellectual property, which is basically like a steam engine, but actually think about, well, what is it? It's us all jamming together, riffing together on some code, then you can start to think about open source software as not being property, but actually something even more radical, something more generative. It's unproperty. It has this unique characteristic that the more you share of it, the more valuable it becomes, right? What is more valuable? What is more reliable? What is more useful? A piece of source code or a software project that has 1,000 contributors, and that gets shared openly with lots of people, or one that's locked down and held over here, right, by like 1 or 2 developers. Obviously, the vibrant community one, everyone feels way better about using that, right? And so, but that's really, really rare, because if you have some unobtainium, something really, really powerful and useful, and you're the only one that has it in the world, then that becomes extremely valuable. And you want that enviable position to be the only one that has all the oil or all the uranium or all the gold or whatever. But this is something that becomes more useful and better as it gets shared more. That's like nothing physical in the world. So this is a really, really interesting thing, because we've actually taken this thing, this intellectual property frame, and wrapped it around something which is exactly the opposite of it. So I think this is a very important point to bring up, but we just kind of, and it might be a little bit weird and nerd and sort of like abstract, but I promise you it's deeply relevant to the discussion on AI. But the one other thing to bring out is that if we say it's not property, and we shouldn't focus on just a scoop of water, but on the entire river itself, then then it naturally leads us to this particular observation, which is that the open source communities, which I think many of us here are part of, they're really unique human ecologies. Most human ecologies actually form, if you think about back in the day, the fishing villages on the side of a river, on the ocean, people inhabiting some little safe cliffside thing, dwelling, whatever it is, humans have clustered around scarce resources in order to defend access to those scarce resources that are particularly valuable to them. But the human ecologies on open source, they're sort of like very openly permissioned. There's a voice and exit aspect that if you don't like what's happening here, you can just leave. You won't die. You can go fork the project, do your own thing, do whatever you want, right? So it's a very participatory thing. So if you want to come in and be part of it, though, then you have got to comply with the norms and the values and the goals of the people who are in this collaboration, or you can go form your own collaboration over there. So this human ecology that is not coercive in general, that is participatory, that's generative, this is a very beautiful and unique thing. And there are some common sort of, or some other physical world analogs we can look to, like a community garden or a community orchestra or something like that, where it's participatory, where the more people that play, that contribute, the better it becomes, but they all still have to sort of comply with some emergent norms and values. And there's a tremendous reliance on individual trust and on individual credibility. Same thing in the open source world, right? You can have literally billion-dollar projects that are the heart of multiple billions of dollars of economic activity. Those projects may only have 3 or 4 key contributors, and everyone looks to those 3 or 4 people as high credibility voices, authoritative voices on where the community is going, what the project is and is not, all these things. And it's not because those guys are walking around with machine guns like forcing everyone to listen to them. It's because it's been this bought-in generative thing where they're accruing trust and credibility. So this is a really important and interesting thing because this lays out a template. If this is just a bunch of whatever, we're all in a drum circle, in some forest somewhere, that would be interesting, but not particularly notable from an economic standpoint. What's interesting about this is these community orchestras actually create the software that runs the world. All AI basically runs on open source software, right? So much of open data science, I'm actually speaking at the ODSC conference tomorrow, basically giving this exact same talk, so you guys have the preview. But the idea here is that open source has completely commoditized and destroyed commercial software in all the really important growth areas. So it's like a drum circle, kumbaya drum circle in the middle of the forest that actually powers tens of billions of dollars of economics, right? Hedge fund guys are flying in to listen to drum circles and they go trade better, right? This is the kind of thing that we're sitting in the middle of. And these drum circles are where the AI is coming from as well. So that's why I bring this up, is that we have actually got to understand, all of us are sitting around drumming, that we're doing something immensely powerful and different and cool. So then, kind of eliding into the AI thing, this is a podcast I recorded. This is on the Andreessen podcast. I was interviewed by Martin Casado, and I made this point on there that software, well, actually, if you read Marx, you'll see there's a discussion that essentially there's a general mode where things get commoditized. We get better and better at making them. It becomes cheaper and cheaper to make things. So there's general commoditization sort of thing. With software, initially, people who could write software were very few, and so software is very valuable. And then as time rolled on, and as the internet came around and was able to collect, sort of broadly search for people who could jibe with each other and make cool software, the cost of making software got less and less. And because the cost of reproduction of software is basically zero, right? Just CP tarball to another tarball or to another location, it all just became very much snapped to who's got some good ideas, who can go write some good code, and that becomes incredibly commoditizing. I made a point on some other podcast, I forget when, but I was saying that essentially the maintainers of the entire core Python numerical and scientific stack at one point could have fit in a minivan. And that small group of people, they're responsible for code that literally runs billions and billions of dollars of daily economic activity, right? That's insane leverage. That is an absolutely insane, I think 5 or 6 orders of magnitude level of leverage. Yeah, because you think about how much it costs to feed a person, you think about billions of dollars of economic value. It's not very much, right? So the point here is that open source software has been massively commoditizing the margins on, well, it should be massively commoditizing on the margins of software. And so even though Andreessen, and I was on the Andreessen podcast and I was saying this, even though Mark Andreessen says software is eating the world, my point about the numerical software stack and the Python PyData stuff was that we're taking just code as code, and we're compressing all of that. And so software is eating the world, but it's not the best digester of value. That there's something more interesting, which is taking data and having code that is data dependent, data sensitive, building predictive models, building things that are actually a fusion of code and data together. And I was saying this in 2020, so quite a bit before the AI wave really hit. And now we can all see, oh, of course, everyone wants models. Everyone wants LLMs and pre-trained networks and all these other kinds of things. Of course it's code plus data. That's the valuable thing. But even just 2 years ago, this perspective was still a little bit, I felt like I was a little bit out there in articulating this. But the point is that we should be able to, in this new era that's coming, that's clearly arrived, the software bit is commoditized out. Now the data bit is not necessarily commoditized, but so much of the growth in VC, so much of the growth in corporate value in the public markets, all of those different companies, they're making so much money off of software, but the value of software should be commoditizing out. And so coming back to this industrial capitalism slide, I want to add one bullet point at the bottom here, which is that hopefully I've given you a little bit of a preview of this concept or convinced you a little bit that the stakeholder economics and social equity that we get in the community-oriented open source software development communities, that's fundamentally different. And it's not what you see in commercially driven corporate software activity. And the thing that's happening now is, per this slide, open source is compressing and commoditizing out that commercial software development activity. And so what comes next, right? So let's talk about AI, or AI in quotes, whatever AI means to you. And so actually, just to clear the air, there's a few hot takes, right? I really do think AI is a big deal. I think it's going to be bigger than PCs or the internet. We're in a once-in-a-lifetime level. And I was kind of here for most of the PC. I was kind of here certainly for consumer internet, for mobile, for smartphones. I'm only 40 years old, but that's like 200 years in the internet years. But AI will definitely be bigger than PCs for sure. And LLMs are amazing, but we're just starting out with them. And it's not clear how any of the foundation models are going to make money whatsoever, right? But the other thing that's happening, though, even though this is absolutely transformative, it's not instantaneously transformative. So it's not like instantly overnight everyone's going to be out of a job. We are going to be proceeding through a technology adoption cycle. We're going to see, people like leaning into this, adopting it, seeing what works and what doesn't from a commercial standpoint. So that's basically where I'm at on AI. Hopefully that answers some questions about why I put AI in quotes here. But with all this being said, I think maybe the most clarifying thing that I've seen about this is an articulation from Ben Thompson, who writes a blog called Stratechery, which all of you should read because it's fantastic. And he puts it in this very simple frame. And he says, look, when humans invented writing, right, there's a general, what he calls the idea propagation value chain. And what that means is, if you have an idea, how do you propagate the value of that idea out to the world? Well, you first have to have the idea. That's the creation, right, over here, creation. Substantiation is like articulating that idea somehow. Duplication, once you've articulated, if you just tell your friend, well, that friend has to tell some other friends, and then they have to tell some other people. That takes a while, right? So the duplication is a bit of a bottleneck if that's all you have. And then if you are able to solve the duplication thing, like let's say you have a printer, right? Then you can then distribution is a problem. You can print 1,000 copies. You can't get them to all the different cities in the empire. That's still a problem. And at the end of the day, someone has to be able to consume that. So you can have writing, printing, distribution, and bookstores, but if no one can read, you still have a problem, a bottleneck in your value propagation chain. So if we work backwards from there, the invention of writing, and I would say the adoption of literacy, that unbundled. It broke off consumption of ideas from the creation and distribution of ideas. The printing press resolved the duplication and distribution bottleneck. And now, what's interesting, if we look at LLMs, they remove this final bottleneck of substantiation. You can have an idea, and you don't have to be particularly good at putting pen to paper, and you can concretize your idea. You can say, you know what, I could have been a rapper like Eminem. I have like this great, there's just something I want to rap. I'm not actually, okay, you know what, I'm not a very good rapper, but I want a rap song that's like about this, and then add this stuff to it, and you can give that prompt to ChatGPT, and it will give you an Eminem, almost Eminem level quality, set of lyrics. So this is a very interesting thing that the substantiation bottleneck got removed. It's not something that I'd ever thought was possible in my lifetime, but here we are, right? So if this is the idea propagation chain, what this really means, in my opinion, is that the opportunity is that everyone in the business now can build, right? Every knowledge worker is now a builder. They're not merely a point and clicker. They're not merely a citizen data scientist who's too scared of writing Python and R. They can just say, I want Python code to do X. I want a bit of R code that uses this R library to generate that thing, and then just put it into an email here and send it to this person. They can just think it and it happens. That's amazing. That's every bit as amazing as the M&M wrap, but commercially much more useful, right? So a lot of business friction is locked up in the inefficiencies over the last 40 years or so, basically where businesses are unable to resolve this. They have to get software people to come in, write software. They have to get IT people to come in, rack machines, network them to run that software to do these things. So now a lot of small and medium businesses can just directly move deeply to meet their needs. And so I think the next 10 years, we're going to see this incredible transformation of essentially every business. And another way to think about this is that AI, I think, is going to reset the entire tech value chain. Everything that we do in tech today, and that includes all of the people in this room writing components and pieces, we really spend a lot of our time working on the bits and pieces. And we assume that, hey, if we make a better transmission, there's a lot of car manufacturers out there that'll want a better transmission. If I make a better set of tires, there's lots of cars out there we could upgrade to the new tires. But what the users actually want is they just want a damn car. They don't want a box of parts. They don't want IT to tell them that they have old parts and they can't upgrade these parts. They just want a car that does X, or they want a truck that does Y. And what we've done with AI is, well, where we're getting to is they can just 3D print the cars they need. That's kind of interesting. It might be a little scary, but it's very, very exciting. Another way to think about this is that if you look across the world at all of the different problems, now I put business problems here, but this could be consumer problems too. If you look at all the problems that could be solved by technology, there's a long tail of problems, and then the vertical axis is the cost of the solution. There's a pile of things, of problems that are very expensive to solve, and there's a giant pile of problems that are very cheap to solve. And the interesting thing is businesses only spend money on the problems that are expensive, right? Because IT has to give a rip. And if your problem is really, oh, you know, I'm just tired of clicking on this thing and dragging to this folder and then logging into this site and then having to go to this old FTP thing and then pulling these together into Excel and then doing this report every afternoon, your IT guys are like, yeah, no, that's not my problem. Like, that's your job, so you should just do your job, right? But if you're like, oh, you know what, I can't query these 10 billion rows every second. We should go procure something for this, right? So the entire existing IT industry is basically above that minimum service ceiling of budget required to make anybody care. And what's interesting is everything underneath is self-serviced by Excel and Visual Basic. And the mass of the thing underneath is about 100 times bigger than the mass of the stuff above. It's just too small to get anyone's attention in IT. There is a small little thing here, which is, I should probably put a little thing here. This is your consultant class. So consultants come along and solve these problems. Y'all laugh because you know it's true. So the question then, if that's the case, if we go and we take AI and we transform this entire thing, so all these people are self-servicing their own things, here's the question. Who owns the upside? And this is where we bring this back to the question around software, right? Because I think LLMs will absolutely transform business. There's been this criticism that LLMs are just bullshit generators, but 90% of business work is bullshit. So it's like actually a problem because you have to commoditize out 90% of the stuff you pay people 90% of the time. So you either give everyone, 4.5 days off every week, or you find something else for them to do, but something's got to give because we all know, if anyone who's worked in any business more than 200 people, there's a ton of crap, right? Ton of crap work, ton of like stupid nonsense. All that stuff can just go away. And it's empowered, every single individual worker is empowered to do this for themselves. So this is the interesting thing too, right? Code gen is going to be good enough. All y'all think it's really fun to use Copilot. You're laughing now. But here's a really interesting thing. What if people didn't even need to write all that code in the first place, right? What if they could directly just hook up this database to that thing, generate some SQL, generate this thing, and then they're done. Like, because the AI now, if you look at AutoGPT, LangChain, all these different things, the AI can use tools. So what does this mean? Right? And you all think that it's like, well, maybe this can happen to us because software, we fly high. But actually, there's been plenty of cases in history where people who were flying high suddenly got commoditized out of a job because the entire industry went away. So the interesting thing is, even if we help build some of this technology, we still get our little chunk of it. If we help empower all these individual knowledge workers in every business to self-service with LLMs, the question is, who makes the money, right? Are businesses going to go and offer a massive like compensation refund to everyone? Is business going to go and give everyone 90% of their time back? So we have this fundamental attribution problem, and it's not just about, does some artist, have their feelings hurt because some Mid-Journey picture came out that looks like their art. This is actually the crux question about the future of an AI-powered human economy. And my argument is that to commercialize LLMs, we have to solve the attribution problem, and it will not solely rest in the question of copyright. We need a new kind of holistic licensing model that includes code, data, and actually the human training efforts that go and tailor and tune the LLM to do the right thing. So I think a new kind of license is required. I think all existing copyright and IP law basically is I wouldn't say mooted, but it's dancing around it's not actually going to be able to address the problem, because all of them are rooted in the concept of mechanical reproduction, and LLMs are not just mere mechanical reproducers. I also think that a real issue right now is that we have really powerful industries on all sides that are fighting each other. You got all big tech on one side, trillions of dollars of market cap, versus basically every author, songwriter, performance artist, every musician, every actor and actress, everybody is just on opposite sides of this thing. Right now with the writer's strike, all of these things, these people are fighting, and it's not just like, oh, let's figure this out. They're fighting for all the marbles, right? If tech says, no, it's all fair use, everyone over here is out of a job. All the estates are out of all of their future royalties. If these people win, then all of tech, has to go back to like trying to sell everyone the metaverse, right, versus the AI stuff. Because all of this stuff is now captured, and they have to go back to, metaverse, which is, yay, metaverse. But anyway, so the interesting thing is that the other thing, which people don't necessarily talk about, but it's really kind of interesting, LLMs are really powerful, but they can be really small. You can run them on a laptop. If LLM technology was so amazing and transformative, but it required a room full of computers and GPUs, well, that would be one thing. But you can run these things on your phone. That's really, it's really empowering if you're a human, but it's really discouraging if you are some giant scaled Moloch that wants to capture all of it, right? So, because that's really annoying that everyone could just do this. And so even if we come in with any kind of a, big regulatory whatever thing, there's gonna be so much rogue usage. Everyone will be able to run this stuff, right? I mean, the Facebook Llama model got thrown to BitTorrent in about 48 hours, right? So this is a really interesting dynamic. And one possible outcome, if we don't, as a community, come up with a new license and come up with some kind of way to put community dynamics into this and carry the spirit of open source forward, what will happen, my prediction, is we'll get something very similar to what happened with the Google versus the Authors Guild lawsuit. How many of you are familiar with that lawsuit? Anyone know about this? All right, you get a cookie. So, wait, were you working for Google at this time when this went? Okay, all right. I have to ask. So the interesting thing here is Google Books, they were scanning in all these books. And they're like, hey, we'll put all the information on the internet for people to go and search. And then all of the copyright holders are like, whoa, hold on a second, right? So the Authors Guild of America filed a class action lawsuit against Google and a bunch of other people, some of the libraries who gave them the books to go and scan, saying massive copyright infringement. And ultimately what ended up happening was there was a settlement. And they settled the class, and then other people were angry and tried to overturn because they're saying, no, this doesn't represent all the authors. And so there's all this the estate of John Steinbeck was like mad. Like when Steinbeck's mad at you, you're probably not on the right side of history. But there's all of this stuff, and finally, so what was interesting was that, Ursula Le Guin was like, this is totally bullshit. They're selling us down the river. In fact, this settlement threatens the entire concept of copyright, is what she said, right? But finally, they did settle, actually, and the courts upheld it. The appellate courts upheld it, and actually the Supreme Court denied a petition to hear the case. They're like, we're done. So this took 10 years, 2005, 2015. It was finally settled, and that was it. Okay? And Google was like, yep, we can scan all these books in. It's totally fair use. We'll put it online for people to search. We're good. So what could happen then is if we do not create a community-oriented and decentralized multi-stakeholder system for adjudicating rights around AI, we are going to end up in a situation, this is my hypothesis, where big tech will have a private settlement with the existing major copyrights holders, right? So when Microsoft and Google, Facebook, Amazon, and Sony and Warner and Universal, and when all of them get into a room, definitely the best outcome for humanity will emerge, right? So what I think will happen is essentially they'll form a consortium, a de facto sort of licensing cartel. You can see this back in the day when digital video first emerged, and there were the DVD standards, and all these things got minted into law, and kids got thrown into jail, I think, for trying to crack the encryption on with DCSS and stuff. In any case, this is basically the way I think it's going to play out if we don't create a third path that has baked into it the DNA that comes from the open source community, the code community that actually surfaced and created all of this, or enabled all of this innovation in the first place. And so all of that, kind of summing it up and netting it out, the question is, so what? So what if this happens? I mean, this is fine. We had DVDs. We played them for a while. Now we have streaming. And, we have DRM in our browser with every single video streaming platform. So what, right? And I think the so what here is that this technology is so fundamentally and radically transformative for humanity that it has to be a multi-stakeholder kind of innovation. Because I think AGI is definitely possible. It's potentially inevitable. And if we don't allow many voices to contribute to the question of what values we want in that thing, if it's created by, if there's a gatekeeping force of every government on the planet, keeping open innovators out and just reinforcing a cartel model around this stuff, I think that's kind of bad, right? Because I think what I'm seeing now already is that the community that created the code for this stuff, we're not invited in to govern this stuff, right? We already, even in the open source community, we've created so many complex stacks that end users are left behind. They don't know how to use any of this stuff. And now we have a democratizing revolution where they can start using technology. They can actually get a bicycle for the mind. We can actually have the Memex vision of the old days. And in the middle of all of that, we have this rights battle. So this precious moment right now where if it resolves the wrong way, it becomes just walled gardens everywhere for AI. And so this is one of my favorite quotes from actually he is a Marxist. I'm not really a Marxist, but Marx has some useful framing around industrial labor economics. But Jacques Ellul had this really great observation that basically the entire world runs on efficiency as the total phenomenon for civilization. Not meaning, not satisfaction, but efficiency. And my bet is if we go into this world, that will just perpetuate, that will continue, and we will then have a hyper sort of delamination of upper classes and lower class, or upper class and lower classes, and that will lead to great strife because that's not stable, right? And so, anyway, on that note, just want everyone to contemplate, right? What are the values that we want to imbue into this transhuman intelligence, which I think will inevitably emerge, and how do we bring that about with what we do? Thanks.
On attribution that you were talking about, do you agree that it's not just an ownership problem, but also a veracity problem? And on a related...
Sorry, what problem and not a what?
A veracity problem, meaning that attribution is... So one of the things about artificial intelligence is while the models are often open source, their operation is very opaque, right? And so the issue is while the model itself is open source, it actually makes the process of generating information more opaque. And its sourcing more opaque. I'd like you to comment on that and how, and the related issue about the voluntary nature of any governance that would be put over that and how we actually would put that into practice.
Yeah, so on the first question, the current generation of LLMs are these big giant models, with tens or hundreds of billions of parameters. They throw in large amounts of tokens and content for them to train on. But we are seeing research that shows that, there's just research coming out every week that shows you can get smaller models, and then you can actually compose models, and you can do other sorts of things that get you certain kinds of performance that would allow you to perhaps get better, a little bit more visibility of what's happening in these things. Additionally, there are there are things we can do to try to better audit and govern kind of what goes into them, what comes out of them. And what I would just encourage people to think about is, you think about airplanes, right? And the first viable heavier than air airplane by the Wright brothers, that thing was literally put together in a like a bicycle workshop garage. No one today got here by flying on such a device, right? We got here today on the basis of flying on devices that are created at scale, but that are created with safety and redundancy in mind. So the cost of building an airplane is actually pretty cheap if you don't care about safety, reliability, any of these things. If you don't want to know a priori you're going to come down and land in one piece, right? You can build an airplane pretty cheap. There's lots of people who build kit planes and don't make it. But the point is we put so much effort and energy into safety, into reliability, into testability in making airplanes that have nothing to do with actually the ability to fly. It's same thing with drugs, same thing with anything. We put a lot of effort into all of the stuff around it. And so I don't see why LLMs should be any different. Right now we have the Wright brothers moment. It's cool, it does this thing. There's no way to govern it. There's no way to attribute who put their ideas into it, right? It might be that it becomes 3 or 5 or 10 or 50 times more expensive to do those parts than the other part, but it's a better economic environment, a better civilization, a more equitable civilization that we build on this technology if we do that than if we didn't, right? It's just like it's better to fly in airplanes that have a ton of testing that are super expensive because we test the crap out of them. It's better to have that than a culture where airplanes randomly fall out of the sky because the wings fell off. So I think that's just something to think about. The second thing is around the volunteer nature. I think when you start doing these other things and people can see that their ideas and their work can flow into a larger, abundant economic environment, then it won't be in volunteer labor. It'll actually be, there's plenty of economics there for everyone to participate in.